I could forgive him, but I didn't want to. I came home the way I always did, tired, but with my heart still reaching forward. The wind outside was sharp, and my hands stung as I fumbled with my keys, juggling grocery bags and a battered tote filled with wrapped gifts. Inside, the apartment welcomed me with quiet warmth. I didn't even take off my coat at first. I just stood there, watching the soft flicker of the string lights on my little tree. On the table, a green sweater folded carefully into tissue paper, a cinnamon apple bread cooling in its tray, and a lineup of modest, neatly wrapped presents, each with handwritten tags. I had even remembered the card for Celeste, Ethan's girlfriend. I didn't know much about her, but I figured kindness might smooth over the awkwardness of a first family holiday. My phone buzzed. I reached for it, my face already tilting into a small smile. Ethan. He always forgot something last-minute: cups, chairs, directions. I expected his usual rush of disorganized gratitude. But the second I heard his voice, I knew something was off. Hey, Nat. Not hey, sis. Not hey, you. Just Nat, flat and hollow. He sounded distant. Polished. Listen, he continued. Too breezy. Celeste is coming to Christmas this year. I paused. So what? She's really sensitive to, energies and stuff. Energies. The word landed in my chest like a dropped plate. I waited for a laugh. A joke. But none came. With your work at the hospital and all, he said, it can feel kind of heavy. Heavy. That was the word that burned. Like I was some grim shadow he was trying to step away from. We just think it might be better if you sat this one out. We. So, it wasn't just him. It was collective. Decided. For her sake. Like I was a threat. Like my presence was a problem they had to solve. He added, almost as an afterthought, it's nothing personal. But it was. It was entirely personal. Every syllable was a scalpel, slicing me out of something I had never really been allowed to claim in the first place. I could barely breathe. But I said it anyway. Okay. That one word, dry, crumbling, was the only thing I could manage. Ethan exhaled in relief. I knew you'd understand. You're always good about these things. Good about being erased. Good about being useful. Good about disappearing when it made things easier for other people. He hung up. I didn't move. I didn't sit. I didn't blink for a long moment. I stared at the lights on the tree, blinking steadily, as if mocking how I'd decorated for a holiday that no longer included me. The cinnamon bread still filled the room with warmth, but it made me sick now. I had baked it because they loved it, because I thought bringing it would mean I mattered, even a little. The sweater for Ethan. The thoughtful card for Celeste. The soft socks for Mom, the book for Dad. I'd spent my own small savings, chosen everything carefully, convinced myself that generosity could be enough to earn a place at the table. But now I was something too heavy. An energy too off. A burden too inconvenient. Then my phone buzzed again. Mom. I hesitated. Somewhere in me, a fragile hope sparked. Maybe she was calling to say it was all a misunderstanding. That she didn't agree with Ethan. That I was, of course, still invited. Still wanted. I answered. Hey, Mom. Her voice was soft. Too soft. That artificial gentleness she used when she was about to say something sharp, but wanted it to sound like silk. Honey, she began, we're just trying to make things easy for everyone. Easy for everyone, but not for me. That part was implied. You know how Celeste is. Another excuse. Another justification for my absence. A stranger's comfort weighed more than my presence. If you come, she said, it might cause confusion. Confusion. The word echoed like a slap. What did she think I was going to do? Sit on the floor and ruin the vibe with my hospital stories? My life? Then she said it. Flat and final. Honestly, if you show up, we might not even answer the door. That was the moment everything snapped quiet inside me. My breath didn't hitch. My hands didn't shake. There was just a ringing stillness. The kind you hear right before a storm breaks. I didn't respond. She didn't say anything else. The call ended. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, surrounded by things I had chosen with care for people who didn't even want to open a door for me. The green sweater I folded and refolded until the lines were perfect. The bread pudding I woke up at 6 to bake, so it would still be warm when I arrived. All of it meant nothing. Not because it wasn't good, but because it came from me. I walked to the table and sat, hands in my lap, eyes fixed on the gifts. And I felt it. Every wound from that call opened deeper, older bruises. Not just from today. From every time they asked me to give, but never offered anything back. From every time Ethan forgot my birthday, and I still sent him money when he couldn't pay rent. From every time my parents brushed off my promotions, my graduation, my night shifts, but threw parties when Ethan posted a new photo on his social media. They didn't just uninvite me from Christmas. They reminded me that I was only ever welcome when I was useful, when I was giving, quietly, without asking for anything in return. I stood up, suddenly cold. I went to my laptop, opened my banking app. The screen glowed softly in the dark room. Mortgage top-up, canceled. Car loan support, ended. Monthly buffer deposit to mom and dad, terminated. Emergency account for Ethan, frozen. They would notice eventually. The credit card bill wouldn't get paid on time. The cushion would be gone. And no one would understand why. They'd say it came out of nowhere. They wouldn't remember this night. But I would. I put the bread in the fridge, removed the tags from the gifts, folded the green sweater, and slid it back into the bag it came in. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, slow, unbothered by the chaos inside me. I sat by the window and let the silence settle. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't send a single message asking why they didn't want me. Because I knew. And for once, knowing was enough. The snow didn't stop that night. It just kept falling, steady and slow, like it had nowhere else to be. I sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, a mug of cooling tea in my hands. The soft hum of the radiator filled the apartment like a lullaby no one else could hear. I hadn't turned on the lights. Just the tree, blinking quietly in the corner, its glow casting small moving shadows across the wall. Each light was like a breath. Each shadow, a reminder. For a long time, I just stared. Not at anything in particular. The snow, the windows, the unread message from my aunt on my phone. But eventually, my mind drifted in the way it does when silence is left to stretch too long. And the memories started to rise. Not loud ones. Not dramatic. Just the quiet kind. The ones that don't feel like trauma until you realize they've been with you your whole life. I remembered sitting on the carpet in our old living room, maybe 7 or 8 years old, surrounded by wrapping paper and crumpled tissue. It was Ethan's birthday. The miracle baby, as they used to call him. There were balloons, a huge chocolate cake, laughter that echoed down the hall. And me? I was the one refilling paper plates, the one collecting used napkins. Mom had handed me a plastic bag and whispered, "Be helpful, sweetheart. Don't make a fuss." No one ever looked at me the way they looked at him. Not even close. Later, I gave Ethan the drawing I'd spent hours on, a forest with deer and stars, drawn in careful pencil lines. He glanced at it, nodded once, and tossed it on the table. I don't think he even said thank you. I said it for him. "It's okay," I whispered. He's excited. He didn't mean it. That became my inner refrain. Every time something small hurt, I explained it away before anyone else could notice. Before anyone else could feel uncomfortable. Another memory floated up. My high school graduation. I had just received the medal for academic excellence. Valedictorian. Full scholarship. I stood on the porch with the certificate still warm in my hand, my cheeks flushed from applause. Dad was on the lawn, sipping lemonade. "Make sure you don't burn out," he said without looking up. "It's a long road. Don't overdo it." Later, Ethan told a story at dinner about getting into a short film festival. He hadn't submitted anything. He just knew a guy. Mom cried tears of joy. They printed the email, framed it, hung it up. I hung up my medal on a nail behind my bedroom door. A month later, it fell. No one noticed. It wasn't that they were cruel. That would have been easier. People know how to fight cruelty. You name it. You confront it. But what do you do with neglect dressed in warmth? How do you protest being forgotten when it's packaged as you're the strong one? Every memory that surfaced brought with it a whisper I had long buried. You were never the favorite. You were the fallback. You weren't loved for who you were. You were tolerated for what you could give. I remembered the first time I ever saw the inside of a hospital. Not for school. Not for work. I was 16. Ethan had slipped on the icy front steps and twisted his ankle. The whole family rushed him to the ER, fussing over every detail. The nurse gave him a sticker. My mom asked for extra gauze just in case. 2 weeks later, I passed out from dehydration during exams. I came home pale and dizzy, forehead clammy, vision blurred. My mother looked up from her magazine and said, "Drink some water, sweetheart. You need to take better care of yourself." That was the day I learned silence was safer than need. I thought about my sketchbooks, the ones I used to fill during my late-night shifts, between rounds, between surgeries, between the quiet cries of patients whose names their families had already forgotten. Those sketches, my small attempt to create something beautiful, were once mistaken for scrap paper. I found one of them in the recycling bin beneath an old cereal box. When I asked my father about it, he said, "Oh, I thought that was a grocery list." He smiled, not cruelly, just carelessly. That was almost worse. I looked at my phone again. The screen had dimmed. My aunt's message was still unread. I tapped it open. I heard what happened. "Are you okay?" I know they can be, a lot. Aunt Lillian was always the only one who asked how I was without needing something in return. She once sent me a birthday card with $20 tucked inside and a note that said, "You deserve to be celebrated too, you know." I reread her message. I didn't know how to answer. I wasn't sure what okay even meant anymore. Was I okay? No. But was I surprised? Also no. I moved through the apartment like someone cleaning up after an invisible storm. I took the sweater out of its box and folded it neatly. Slid the gifts back into the closet. Removed the tags. Each small action felt like a quiet funeral. Not for the holiday, but for the version of me that kept showing up to be heard, thinking this time might be different. I sat down again and opened a fresh page in my notebook. This time, I didn't draw. I made a list. Every quiet loan I had given Ethan. Every copay I had paid for Mom. Every deposit into my father's emergency fund. Every late-night transfer I'd made so the electricity wouldn't shut off in their house. Date. Amount. No thank you. No recognition. Just the assumption that I would always be there. That I had no life of my own to tend to. That list grew longer than I expected. By the time I finished, the snow outside had grown heavier. The street below was covered in white. Clean. Soft. Indifferent. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body was still. My mind was loud. I thought about the phrase family first. How they had said it every time they needed something from me. Every time they wanted me to give more, shrink more, stay small and quiet and useful. Family first, but only if that family made them feel good. Family first, unless that family made things complicated. Unless I reminded them of something they didn't want to look at too closely, like sacrifice, like truth, like history. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I got up and poured myself another cup of tea. I sat at the table, staring at the blank notebook page I had left open beside the list of debts. Then I picked up my pen, and I wrote a sentence I had never dared say before. I don't have to earn love anymore. Not through gifts. Not through silence. Not through usefulness. I didn't even know what it meant to believe that sentence yet. But it sat there on the page, simple and powerful. It looked like freedom. I remembered the moment Ethan told me once, "You're lucky. You've got everything figured out." He said it after I had just covered his rent for the 3rd time that year. He said it after quitting another freelance job. He said it while sitting on my couch, eating food I bought, using Wi-Fi I paid for. I had smiled. Yeah, I said. Lucky. What I didn't say was that luck had nothing to do with it. That I had earned everything through sleepless nights and long shifts and quiet heartbreak. And even then, it had never been enough for them to see me. The snow stopped just before dawn. I opened the window, just a crack. The air was sharp and clear. I stood there for a long moment, watching the first light rise across the quiet street. It felt honest, like something had finally settled. They had chosen. And now, so had I. It wasn't a dramatic decision. There were no slammed doors, no tearful ultimatums. Just snow, falling outside my window like it had all winter, patient, impartial, unbothered by everything breaking beneath it. By the third morning, the apartment was still as ever, except now the silence wasn't empty, it was intentional. I made oatmeal, sweetened it with a little brown sugar and apple slices, and sat at the table in my flannel robe. I didn't check my phone. I didn't open my laptop. The bread pudding still sat untouched in the fridge, but I didn't throw it out. It was a reminder of something. Effort that went unseen, warmth that went unwelcomed. It no longer hurt the way it did before. Now it simply meant enough. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family since the calls. No group chats. No emails. No quiet questions from mom about tech issues. No Venmo notifications from Ethan asking for just a little help this week. At first, I thought I'd feel panic without them. The compulsion to fix, to manage, to keep everything stitched together before the seams burst. That instinct had always been stronger than my own needs, but it was gone. The urgency had faded, like a muscle finally released after years of tension. And the only thing left in its place was clarity. I went to my desk and pulled out a manila folder labeled Family Admin. Inside, a dozen documents I'd created and maintained for them over the years. Budget spreadsheets, bill schedules, insurance logins, password cheat sheets, tax notes. My handwriting was on every corner of their lives. For a moment, I just stared at the stack of paper. I could see the hours in it, the invisible labor that had shaped every month of the last decade. Then, one by one, I removed myself. Auto payments, canceled. Online access, revoked. Bank alerts, disabled. Shared folders, deleted. I didn't leave a note. There would be no explanation. They would notice when the gaps appeared, when the bills went unpaid, when their forgotten responsibilities floated to the surface. And maybe they'd ask questions. Maybe they wouldn't. Either way, I wouldn't be there to answer. That evening, I bundled myself in a heavy coat and walked 2 blocks to the post office. I had a padded envelope in my hands, the green sweater neatly folded and sealed. No letter. No return address. Just a name, Ethan Hartman. And a line across the front, return to sender. I dropped it into the outgoing bin and walked home through the snow. The next morning was Christmas Eve. Normally, I would have been up at sunrise, packing the car, sliding trays of food into thermal bags, reminding myself to bring chargers, directions, emergency snacks, backup gifts. My role had always been quiet logistics. Make it happen. Keep it smooth. This year, I didn't even shower until noon. I read for a while. Took a long walk. Answered emails from patients' families who had sent quiet holiday thanks. I responded with warmth and honesty. Those people saw me. They remembered my name. It was enough. I passed a bakery near the corner where a little girl pressed her mittened hands to the glass, staring at a spinning tray of cupcakes. Her mother knelt beside her, pointing at the frosting colors. They looked at each other like they shared something no one else could see. That small moment, so ordinary, unraveled something deep in my chest. Because I had never had that kind of bond with my mother. Not even close. With her, every gesture was a negotiation. Every hug was bookend with a reminder of who needed what. Even as a child, I learned quickly that her warmth came with conditions. Be polite. Be helpful. Be the easy one. And maybe, you'd get 10 minutes of her time. Maybe. I thought about the year Ethan dropped out of college again, his third time, and came home talking about reinventing himself. He'd been gone a month when they hosted a welcome-back dinner for him. The entire kitchen was decorated with banners that read New Beginnings. Mom baked 2 pies. Dad hung up twinkling lights. When I passed my final medical exams, top 2% of my class, I sent them a photo of the certificate. They never replied. Not even a thumbs up. That night, the power flickered once, then steadied. I lit a candle anyway, just for the atmosphere. The snow was heavier now, blanketing the city like a soft hush. The streets outside were silent. My apartment had never felt more peaceful. There was something sacred in the solitude. Not loneliness, not isolation, but the absence of demand. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't fixing. I wasn't trying to earn what should have been mine by default. Somewhere across town, I imagined their house. Lights on, chatter flowing, Celeste probably laughing in the kitchen. The music turned low, just loud enough to mask any tension beneath the surface. I pictured them setting the table with 4 plates. And the empty chair that used to be mine. Would they talk about me? Would they tell Celeste I was just so busy this year? Would they say I'd changed? That I was difficult? Unstable? They'd never admit they had uninvited me. That they had locked the door before I even reached it. But they'd shape the story because they always did. And for the first time, I didn't care. Before bed, I stood at the window again. My hands curled around a warm mug of peppermint tea. I watched the streetlights blur through the snow, and I breathed in the stillness. No one called. No one texted. The silence wasn't empty, it was earned. A space I had carved for myself, finally free of expectation. I once read that when scaffolding is removed from a building, people don't thank it for holding everything up. They just admire the structure. And when something cracks later, they never think to ask what once held it all together. That's what I had been. Scaffolding, support beams, invisible architecture. But I was never the one being admired. I was never the house. Just the frame beneath it. Until now. Christmas morning arrived in gray stillness. No alarms. No lists. No frozen highways. I made coffee. Opened the window just slightly to let the cold air brush against my face. And I stood there, quiet and steady, watching the world wake up without me in it. They wouldn't notice I was missing. Not yet. But they would. It started quietly. A single email on the morning of December 27th, tucked between retail ads and a holiday newsletter from the hospital. Subject: Can we talk? No name. No warmth. Just 3 plain words. It was signed by all 3, Mom, Dad, Ethan. A united front. That was how they always operated, especially when something threatened the family image. I didn't open it at first. I simply stared at the subject line and let the weight of those words roll around in my chest. Can we talk? Talk about what? About how they excluded me. About how they decided I was too inconvenient to include. Or was this one of those clearing the air performances they did when the consequences started to bloom? They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted repair. Not of our relationship, but of their comfort. I finally opened it later that afternoon. I made tea first. Sat at my desk. Took a deep breath. Then I read. The message was long. Polished. Tactful. Heavy with phrases that tried to sound tender but landed with cold precision. We realized things may have been miscommunicated. The holiday was emotionally charged for everyone. Family means something different to all of us. And buried halfway through the second paragraph. We would really appreciate it if you could reach out to Celeste. She's very upset by how things unfolded, and Ethan's career circles are very sensitive to social dynamics right now. There it was. The reason. The real one. They weren't writing because they missed me. They were writing because the story unraveled. I found out later, from Aunt Lillian, who always seemed to sense things, that Celeste had walked out of the Christmas Eve dinner. Apparently, she'd come across an old family photo. A younger version of me, standing between Ethan and a lopsided cake, grinning in an oversized sweater. She had paused, asked who I was. Someone said, "That's Natalie, Ethan's sister." She asked why I wasn't there, and no one had a good answer. Then, in a quiet voice that caught the room off guard, Celeste said something like, "She's a physician, right? I think she treated my grandmother last year. She was extraordinary." The room fell still. No one spoke. Celeste picked up her purse and left 20 minutes later. It wasn't my presence that disrupted the holiday. It was my absence and the echo it left behind. They couldn't explain why the person who'd held everything together for so long suddenly wasn't there. Because to explain it truthfully, they'd have to admit what they had done. And they weren't ready for that. In the following days, more cracks appeared. The mortgage payment I used to top off? Missed. Ethan's phone plan? Suspended. The shared storage account where I saved old family videos? Deleted. The silence I'd built around me became its own kind of pressure, one they weren't used to. Before, when they needed something, I responded immediately. Now, they had to face the stillness. I didn't reply to the email, not because I was being cruel, but because there was nothing left to say. For years, I had explained myself, reasoned, softened my edges for their comfort. This time, I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I didn't defend. I simply chose not to show up. The next day, a package arrived at my door. No return address. Handwritten label. Inside was a photograph, one of the framed pictures that used to sit in the hallway of my parents' house. A rare one of me, wearing my white coat, standing outside the hospital on the day I was promoted to department lead. I had no idea they even kept it. No note. Just the picture. It felt like an offering. Or a warning. I put it in a drawer. Then came the messages. Not from them, at first, but from the outer ring. Cousins. Old family friends. A former neighbor who still followed me on social media. Each one carefully worded, layered with concern. Your mom mentioned you might be struggling. Your brother said you've been under a lot of pressure lately. I'm sure you didn't mean to hurt anyone. Narratives were already shifting. They couldn't explain my absence, so they painted it as instability, unreliability, emotional strain, anything but the truth. That I had finally chosen myself. I sat on my couch that evening, reading the messages with calm detachment. The string lights on my bookshelf blinked gently behind me, reflecting off the framed letter Celeste had sent the hospital months ago, thanking me for my kindness, for saving someone she loved. She had seen me. They never had. And now, they were rewriting the story to make my departure look like failure instead of choice. But I didn't take the bait. I didn't respond. Because I had learned something vital in the silence. When people rely on you never to say no, your refusal will always sound like betrayal. New Year's Eve came. The city lit up with soft celebration. Fireworks cracked in the distance, low and muffled behind the frost-laced windows. I didn't celebrate. Not out of sadness. But because this wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. I sat at my desk and opened a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "This year, I will not ask to be chosen. I will not earn my place. I will belong only to myself." It felt like a promise I had been trying to write my entire life. On January 2nd, a voicemail came. Mom. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the fray behind it. Natalie, I know things have been difficult, but your father's medical bills are coming up again. You usually handle those. We're not sure where to start. Please call me. No apology. No ownership. Just expectation. The familiar script. You're the strong one. You'll come back. You always do. But this time, I didn't. Later that week, I passed by a florist on my way home from work. A pale blue orchid caught my eye, small, delicate, strangely upright in its glass pot. I bought it without thinking. It now sits by my window, thriving in its quiet, blooming in winter. A few days later, I ran into someone who used to know my family. She stopped me outside the bookstore, a paper cup of coffee in her hand, eyes wide. "I heard you didn't go to Christmas this year." I nodded. "They said you were traveling." I didn't correct her. Let them say I was in Paris on a mountain in another time zone. Let them say I was unavailable. Because in a way I was. Unavailable for being used. Unavailable for shrinking. Unavailable for guilt masquerading as love. At night, I still think about the little things. The cinnamon bread I never brought. The gifts I never delivered. The sweater Ethan never opened. But those things are not losses. They are reminders of all I once gave and how none of it ever made me belong. Now, I give only to those who hold me with care. The final message came on a cold Sunday evening, nearly a month after Christmas. This time, it was Ethan. Text only. "Everything's falling apart. I hope you're happy." No greeting. No punctuation. Just blame. And yet, a small confession was buried inside it. You were holding it all together. They knew now. Not because I told them, but because they felt the absence like a sudden drop in temperature. And they had no idea how to warm the house without me. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. It was ordinary at first glance, a cream envelope with no return address, tucked among circulars and bills. I nearly tossed it, but something about the handwriting made me pause. It was slanted and neat, but not practiced. The kind of script you use when you're writing slowly, carefully. Inside was a single page. No decoration. No signature. Just this. "I don't know if you remember me. My grandmother spent her final days at your hospital. You sat with her when we couldn't. You held her hand when she was scared. You brushed her hair. She called you her angel in Scrubs. I never got to say thank you. So I'm saying it now." I read the letter 3 times. The words didn't ask for anything. They didn't twist or manipulate. They just saw me. Not as a role. Not as a function. But as a person. I pressed the page flat on the table and sat with it in silence. No one had ever thanked me like that. Not without a motive. It felt like a closing bell. Or maybe an opening door. Either way, I didn't cry. I just breathed in slowly and let it anchor me. By then, the messages from my family had shifted tone. The early ones had been firm, almost confident, like they were giving me time to come back to my senses. Then came the emotional ones. Guilt wrapped in nostalgia. "We miss you. Ethan's been so quiet. Your dad asks about you every day." And then, the manipulative ones. "You're breaking this family. You're punishing us. This isn't like you." But that was the thing. This was me now. They sent cards next. Real ones. With glossy winter scenes and silver foil lettering. Each one signed with flowing pen strokes. "Love always, Mom and Dad." They still didn't say sorry. They just performed affection, hoping I'd respond to the routine. I didn't. I read them, gently folded them shut, and placed them in a drawer I no longer opened. The most surprising knock came not from them, but from someone else entirely. Celeste. She showed up outside my clinic one Thursday afternoon. I had just finished a long shift. My coat was still buttoned. My gloves were in my hand. She stood near the entrance, a paper bag tucked under her arm, eyes unsure. When she saw me, she smiled, tentative, not forced. "I brought you something," she said, holding out the bag. "It's nothing big. I made banana bread. The kind with walnuts. I remembered you said you liked it when we met." I didn't recall saying that, but I must have. She held the bag out again. "I didn't know," she said, "about how things really were. I didn't see it at first. But after Christmas, I did." I took the bag. It was still warm. We didn't talk long, just a few minutes. Long enough for her to say the words no one else in my family had managed. "I'm sorry they treated you that way." She didn't excuse them. She didn't say, but she just apologized. Then she smiled again softly and left. I didn't eat the bread right away. I placed it on the counter and looked at it for a long time. Not because I doubted her sincerity, but because something about the gesture touched a place I hadn't dared to feel in weeks. The simple kindness. The respect. No one had baked for me in years. Days passed. My phone buzzed more often now. Missed calls. Voicemails. Group messages filled with updates I wasn't tagged in but was clearly meant to see. Photos from Ethan's art show. A family dinner. A blurry picture of my parents at some local festival. All of it captioned with cheerful notes. Wish you were here. I didn't respond. Because I knew those images weren't invitations. They were bait. A carefully curated glimpse into the world I had stepped away from. A world now trying to prove it was fine without me, while quietly begging me to return. The pressure peaked one Sunday morning. I was making coffee when someone knocked on my door. Not a buzz, not a package drop-off, an actual knock. Soft at first. Then again. Firmer. I looked through the peephole. My parents stood there, side by side. My mother clutched a paper bag. My father looked like he hadn't slept. I didn't open the door. I waited. Watched. They didn't speak at first. Just stood there, awkward and bundled in heavy coats. Finally, Mom leaned closer and said gently, as if rehearsed, "We just want to talk." There it was again. The same phrase from the email. The same tone. Not apologetic, strategic. I didn't reply. "Natalie," she continued, "please. We miss you." Still no apology. Still no ownership. Just the same insistence that my absence was the problem, not their actions. They stood there for a few more minutes, then turned and left. The paper bag sat on my doormat. Inside was a container of cinnamon bread pudding. My recipe. I closed the door, carried the container to the fridge, and placed it on the bottom shelf. Then I poured my coffee and sat by the window. That afternoon, I pulled out the photo they had sent me weeks earlier, the one of me in my white coat. I studied it closely. I didn't look happy in it. Not exactly. But I looked solid, rooted, like someone who had held herself together for a very long time, and somehow still stood tall. The truth was, I had stopped being angry. What came after anger was something quieter. Not peace. Not yet. But recognition. A clear-eyed understanding that not everyone who raised you knows how to love you. That sometimes what you needed most was never something they had to give. And that no amount of bending will make you fit a frame that was never built for you. I began taking long walks again. I deleted old voicemails. Blocked a few numbers. Cleaned out drawers filled with obligation. I started sketching again, just small things. Nothing polished. Little moments, a pear on the counter. The outline of my favorite mug. My orchid, still blooming. Life became soft again. Not dramatic. Not perfect. Just mine. There was one last message from Ethan. This time, it came by letter. It wasn't long. Just 2 lines, scrawled in ink. "I'm sorry. I get it now." I stared at the words for a long time. I didn't know what he got, or if he truly did. But for the first time, he wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't blaming. He wasn't pretending. He was reaching, and that mattered. But not enough to open the door again. Not yet. On the final page of my notebook, I wrote, "Rejection is a form of love when it's your own. Love doesn't mean giving everything and receiving silence. The door to my life now opens inward. And only I hold the key. Some nights, I still hear the echo of them. In the corners of my memory. At the edge of a quiet street. The old scripts sometimes stir. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I could go back, just to check. But I don't. Because the quiet now isn't empty. It's mine." The snow finally melted by mid-January. The city returned to its usual rhythm. People rushed past each other again. Horns echoed. Bus stops filled. But something in me had shifted for good. I didn't walk through the world hoping to be seen anymore. I saw myself. And I was enough.